Let's get back into some ball and some topical shit that's taking place. Connor has a question for you.
Yeah, Coach, we're getting to the point in the season now where some teams are kind of headed towards destruction, essentially, and high-profile players are becoming unhappy. Not saying that's happening with the Raiders, but the first high-profile player, Davante Adams, is kind of the first one to want to be traded out. For you, what was your philosophy as a head coach and GM when it came to dealing with players who maybe were unhappy and wanted to be traded, and how often were you able to kind of get that player to buy back in to what the team was doing and stay with the team that you were coaching?
Yeah, that's a great question, Connor. It obviously, I think, depends on the individual player and the situation. Of course, they're all different. There aren't any that are the same, but they're all different. And I think let's talk about just the trading situation to start with. All right, so if you trade a player now that you know you're not going to bring back next year, then that gives you an opportunity to get some value for the player. So you say, okay, this is week 6 coming up, so I'm not going to have in 11 games, this player's not going to be with us anymore. Is it worth a 4th-round pick or a 3rd-round pick or whatever it is to play without this player for 11 players? Because he's not going to be here next year, and I can't trade him after the season because of whatever the circumstances are, his cap number or his contract's up or whatever it happens to be. I think the flip side of that is, why would I trade a player now when I can get the same thing for him at the end of the season? So let's say you have a player who has a good contract that has value next year, but he also has value now. Why not play these last 11 games with him rather than move the player and play without him for basically the same draft choice you think you're going to be able to get in March as opposed to October? And so those are two very different situations that certainly are influenced by the player's contract situation. So it kind of all depends on what the circumstances are and, what your relationship is with the player and what his role is. But like, for example, with, a player like Garoppolo, who we were going to lose in free agency, to be able to trade him to the 49ers for a 2nd-round pick was better than letting him go to free agency and getting a comp 3rd pick a year later, right? So as an example, that's the kind of the thing that you're thinking about is, okay, we're halfway through the year. Can we, we're not going to have him for 8 games. Is that worth the move up from a comp 3rd next year to a 2nd-round pick this year, as an example? So I think if you're talking about the Adams situation, clearly he's unhappy. I think the Raiders are asking for a 2nd-round pick. If that's true, I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what's been reported. That's a very high price to pay for a player that's, I'm not sure whether or not he actually, what his contract situation would be next year, whether you could afford his contract next year or whether the new team would want to redo it. I think, for really a 1-year contract, I think that's really more of like a 4th or a 5th-round pick. I know the player has extra years on his contract. The question is whether or not the trading team would actually be able to absorb those. So I think probably the most likely scenario here for me, it looks like from the outside in, I don't know the details of it, would be that if the Raiders were willing to eat some of the salary this year, then they could trade him to a team that had less cap space, which there aren't very many teams that have the cap space that can afford him right now. Probably no more than half the teams in the league could really afford him without redoing his contract. If the Raiders ate some of that, then that would make him probably more tradable. I think the 2nd-round pick, I'd be surprised if they can get that for him. And then the question is, does Adams want a new contract? Is this similar to the Reddick situation? I think, as a team, you got to be careful. Do you want to get in the same situation that the Jets are in with Reddick, where you trade for a player and then you can't get a contract done with him? All you've done is just absorb a problem and lose a draft choice. You haven't really solved one. So, I think there's a number of things to work through there, what the Raiders are asking for, what his contract is, and then what kind of cap space the trading team has to absorb this player.
Okay, so that Jimmy G trade, there was a lot of chatter around that from the outside looking in about a disagreement potentially. Thank you for clearing up that entire take. And then back to Davante. Do teams say, hey, we want a 2nd-round pick publicly, and everybody else around the league knows that that's probably a 3rd or a 4th, that is just kind of like opening negotiation bids?
Yeah, again, I don't know where that 2nd-round thing came from. That may be true. It may not be true.
No, it's being reported by a lot of people. All the insiders are basically reporting that. Yeah. So I assume if everybody's reporting it, it's probably at least somewhat true. And is that just like an opening call sign, like, hey, that's where we're starting this thing at?
Well, I think, look, Pat, I think if you put the price up high enough, it basically says you don't want to trade the player, right? I mean, if you say, well, it's going to take 2 number ones to get this guy, well, nobody's going to give you that. So, okay, yeah, we'll trade him, but the price is so high, we really don't want to trade him. If you really want to trade the player, then you set the price somewhere that at least it would create some interest. So no different than selling a house or selling a car or anything else. If you want to jack the price up so high that essentially, you're just hoping that somebody would, be desperate or, it's just really a wish that you can get that, but it's not realistic. Then you either have 1 or 0 buyers. I doubt that you would have more than 1.
Okay, so you're saying that the second-round pick, though, is a wish for the Raiders, seemingly, a little bit.
It seems very high to me, yes. It seems high to me, given the player's age and his salary. Look, when you give up a high pick for a good player who has a low cap number, right, that's a good trade. When you give up a high pick, for a player that has a high cap number, now you're paying a lot for the player and you're absorbing a high contract. That's a big expense. Watson in Cleveland, you give up a lot of capital and you're paying the player a lot of money. It's a lot to do. So can you do it? Sure. Denver did it with Wilson. The same thing. You're paying a lot of money and you're giving up a high pick or picks. You better be right on those because it's expensive. You're shopping at the very highest market, and you better really be sure that player is going to be worth it and he's going to make the difference that you want him to make.
Hey, thank you for all that. Yeah. These Mondays are really cool. I know it's just another day in your brain, but we get a chance to hear it for the first time each week about new shit. It's awesome. Your football mind is a beautiful one.